Coming up, we lend more clarity to the playoff picture and why New York Football Giants fans should go ahead and pump the brakes on being upset over that Washington tie this past weekend. We also look at the carousel that is the OBJ Suitor Tour and whether or not we think Big Blue is really in that picture, as well as some other playoff odds that maybe keep us teetering on the excitement of expectations. We break it all down next. Yes, friends. It is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, of course, we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast. My boy, Doug Norrie, and yonder there is the healthy, wealthy, and wise, the seasoned generational ticket holder, Mr. Andrew Makowitz.
Adam, I will say I'm still feeling the effects of Sunday being out at the stadium. I'm going to be honest, being in person, obviously there's just more drinks. There's more everything going on to the point where it really gets you off to a rocky start on a Monday. Like I was in bed, I think by 8:30, 9 o'clock last night. I'm just getting too old for these games. I can't even imagine what it would be in like a 9 o'clock prime time Sunday night game. It's like, forget about it. You're not getting home till 2 a.m.
So you're lucky then that in 2 weeks, when the Giants-Washington game has been flexed to prime time Sunday Night Football, something that we didn't discuss in our pre-show meeting, but within about 15 hours of the Giants and the Commanders tying on Sunday, they were like, flex, because that's going to be something that in 2 weeks from now will really determine the fate of one of these two teams potentially, right? We talked a little bit yesterday about some of the other avenues, et cetera, but were you to lose that game, you're going to find yourself on the outside looking in.
You know, it's funny because everyone says, oh, a tie, it's so boring. We don't want to see ties. And not even 24 hours later, the NFL's like, nope, everyone wants to see ties. We're putting those two teams back out there in prime time. Obviously, the playoff implications are there for it. But it is funny. The Giants are going to have a primetime game. And spare me with all the Daniel Jones isn't good in prime time, game, date, all that different stuff. We're here to talk a little bit more about what that tie actually meant against the Commanders.
Yeah, so I mean, I ran down yesterday's episode, in very helter-skelter, kind of all over the map here. But there were now the updated percentages, both from a betting standpoint and also the actual legitimate percentages to make the playoffs. All those got updated over the last couple of days, and it does paint a little bit of a clearer picture. And one of the big factors inside of that, especially from a betting standpoint, is San Francisco losing their starting quarterback, their second starting quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo. Now Purdy's going to be under center there, taking on Tom Brady next week, which will be I think it's there's something 26 years between their ages or whatever it is. But it does change, I think, the way everyone perceives Seattle, who came off a win, and what maybe is going to happen inside the wildcard group.
I mean, Geno Smith has looked great. That's just a side note, by the way. He's been doing everything for Seattle, and they're winning ball games, so you can't take anything away from them. Yeah, it's interesting. Being in the stadium, you and I were talking about it, and we talked about it on the show. The second the Giants tie, you kind of look around and say, well, everyone told me this was a must-win game. They didn't say that you could tie and what would happen. So at that point, as you're walking out of the stadium, you're feeling like, we kind of let one get away. It's not going to be good for the Giants. This is a bad situation to be in. But then as you kind of give a little bit more time and you understand what the tie actually means, Adam, in all honesty, the tie for the Giants in terms of making the playoffs didn't really do, as much damage as people initially thought it would.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny, too, just because if you go to the NFL playoff picture on NFL.com, wherever you want to go ahead and absorb it, the Giants didn't move. The Giants stayed in the 6th seed. That in and of itself actually should have given fans really a clear picture of what this meant, because the Cowboys obviously stood pat. They got their win. They're 9-3. None of the divisional leaders changed over the course of this weekend. We'll see what happens with the 49ers. But Seattle is the team that actually took the leap forward and got into the playoff picture officially at 7-5, whereas Washington's the team that came down. Other teams like the Lions, like the Packers, they moved up the board as well. We can kind of put that in the all relative basket. But yeah, this is a team that in the Giants that gets to look around now and still gets to say we have ourselves in the second wild card spot. And 2 weeks from now, we're still going to have the exact same scenario play out. Washington, win or lose, and really maybe, depending on what happens in the NFC West, it might be the exact same process of saying, like, listen, a win is ideal. Maybe a tie will be just as good in 2 weeks too.
It's interesting because when you think about what the tie actually means, it was a really good situation for the Giants the more you think about it, because two of those teams, you mentioned the Lions, they probably have to rattle off, well, before this tie, they would have had to win probably 4 of 5 games to get to 9 wins
Yeah.
and be able to have the tiebreaker against the Giants at 9-8. Now they actually have to get 5 wins and run the table if you're the Detroit Lions, because if the Giants can get to 9 wins, having that tie means that the tiebreaker doesn't come into account
At 9 wins, yes.
at 9 wins. So it's an interesting situation where you've actually made the Lions have to get another win, and also the Seahawks. If the 49ers continue to do what they're doing, while Seattle has the tiebreaker against the Giants, that tie is enormous for the Giants, because if the Giants are 9-7-1 and Seattle is 9-8, that tiebreaker doesn't come into play and the Giants will make the playoffs. So when you think about it, it wasn't as good as a win, but it was pretty close, all things considered, knowing that it really took two of the tiebreakers off the table for some of the teams the Giants are competing for that final playoff spot with.
Yeah, and especially when you talk about, now, listen, the picture that you're painting is 9 wins for the New York Football Giants, right? By doing that, it changes these scenarios for a lot of teams. I talked about this a little bit yesterday. We're going to move into the reasons why I think the Giants have some avenues for success going forward here before we turn our attention fully to the Eagles game coming up this week. But you have to think about the fact that that flip-flop scenario of Seattle getting up in the division lead and maybe San Francisco coming back down, the only benefit there is that wins and losses. Now, it's hard for me to get too excited about it because San Francisco is still a dominant defense. I know they're going to be on their third string quarterback here, but they already have 8 wins, right? So if they get to 9, then you start to get into some of those other categories. And by and large, the Giants are going to lose most of those. Chief among them is, what's your divisional record, right? So there's a world where the Giants are only going to maybe get 1 win on their division record this season if they beat Washington in a couple of weeks. I'm not assuming they're going to lose to the Eagles, but we know they're going to be really tough games. However, to your scenario of getting to 9 wins and making it very difficult for anyone else to pull the Giants out of the playoff picture, one of the things that actually starts to get me pretty optimistic about that prospect is what we saw on Sunday in the return of Azeez Ojulari, because we saw Kayvon Thibodeaux, lay the wood against Taylor Heineke, as you highlighted. Azeez Ojulari was very close on a number of plays. Had the strip fumble, we understand that, but I'm talking about this could have been an all-world performance from him in his first game back, which, by the way, speaks to the idea that the Giants held out a couple of players the extra week, didn't want to risk it. You waited. Now they come back, and they're really ready to be impact players. When you think about the schedule going forward for the Giants, beyond the division games, and the Electric Eagles, and Jalen Hurts, there are 2 very specific games that jump out to me in the Minnesota matchup, which is going to be a difficult one, but also in the Colts matchup, which we've kind of been circling for a while now. And that's because Kirk Cousins is not the most mobile quarterback, and Matt Ryan is not a mobile quarterback. In those 2 players, all of a sudden, when you think about Ojulari and Thibodeaux and Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence and O'Shane Ximenez, right? Like, you think about just this wave of players, and Jihad Ward, like, there's plenty of guys you can think about now. If you're fully healthy on that defensive front, you become a very dangerous team. And it does change the dynamic, because something we hadn't seen up until the last week, maybe 2 weeks, a little bit from Thibodeaux as well, was the Giants getting home defensively against the quarterback and disrupting that offensive rhythm.
Yeah, you can really see the difference that someone like Ojulari, and when Thibodeau's out there, the pressure that they can create, it makes everyone on that defense look better, just because there's less time for quarterbacks to do anything that they want to do. I do think that it's important that you mention the Indianapolis Colts game, because that's the one I think that most Giants fans are circling as well, to say, look, there's 5 games left. We feel like with that tie, you have to get 2 more wins on the schedule. So no matter by hook or by crook, the Giants need to go 2-3 down the stretch in order to make the playoffs. And to be honest with you, Adam, if the Giants do anything less than 2-3, you're like, we kind of didn't deserve to make the playoffs anyway. You can't go 1-4 down the stretch and expect to be a playoff team at that point. So for me, you kind of look at it and say, that Washington game obviously is a lose and go home game. I won't say win and you're in because there's still work to be done, but it feels like that's the one game that the Giants have to get. But to your point, Ojulari and Thibodeau against the offensive line of the Colts, knowing that Matt Ryan does not have that mobility, and they really don't have the wide receivers outside to give us fits like McLaurin and Jahan Dotson did, in this game on Sunday. You got to like the Giants' chances against the Colts if you just say, all we need to do is stack the box and stop Jonathan Taylor and make them one-dimensional.
Yeah, now I'm gonna just okay. This is gonna be both sides of my mouth here because I think the matchup with Matt Ryan specifically is a very good one because it's not a mobile quarterback. But I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that Pittman and Pierce, who was my guy coming out of the draft, like they've both come on, they've both been successful. Now in the hierarchy of wide receiver tandems that the Giants have faced coming into these next stretch of games and will face, they're certainly not among the top 2 or 3 teams. And also, there's going to be abilities to get some things done there. I think the biggest benefit is that both of those receivers they have a little bit more size, right? They're going to play more high pointing the ball, some possession stuff. Now, Pierce does have the speed to take the top off of defenses, but they're the kind of receivers that in theory, the Giants can kind of match up against here. And it also feeds into the fact that Adoree Jackson, we talk about Xavier McKinney. There's all these kind of possibilities swirling around here. And just to think a little bit forward to this Philadelphia game, it does make me kind of have the same sense about the Dallas game going back to Thanksgiving, where if you're the Giants coaching staff and you're the medical team, you're kind of going to be playing this game of, hey, in a lot of ways, we put all of our eggs into this first matchup with Washington, came away with a tie. We treaded water. I think is a really good way to look at it. Nothing's changed. Haven't fallen out of our position. 2 weeks from now, it's going to be kind of that all or nothing game. Because just to crystallize that, Andy, even if they win 9 games and it's against the Vikings and the Colts, but you lose to Washington, now all of a sudden Washington will automatically be up ahead of you. And then that Seattle-San Francisco scenario, it just feels like, while not impossible, it feels like 9 wins is probably going to be on the table easily for both of those teams. And now you're just in this really world of hurt where you're probably sitting at the 8th seed or the 9th seed staring in. So it's really important. But I think it's important to acknowledge overall in this season, a theme that I tried to hold to, and I got swept up in the wins as well. It was about developing talent and thinking about what this team can be going forward. That defensive nucleus now in the front there, that is going to be as dangerous of a tandem of 4 players that you have in your defensive front. They're going to be as good as any 4 players across the league over the next couple of seasons.
I am very curious to see how this team sticks together in the last 5 games because, Adam, it's been a lot of give the flowers to Brian Daboll. Look at what Joe Shane's done. Mike Kafka, is a creative mind. And over the last few weeks, there's been some chinks in the armor, right? Like there's been some issues and some challenges. You have guys like Tay Crowder, Rodarius Williams came out Sunday night, were upset and voiced their displeasure about not getting on the field. You have Brian Daboll in his Monday press conference being very, very short with Jordan Renan and Pat Leonard when being asked questions like, hey, how do you feel about this? It was all short 1-word answers, and he was not too happy to be, sitting up at the podium. It's very easy for all the decisions that you make to look very good when you're squeaking out these wins against people like the Ravens and the Packers earlier in the season. Now, all of a sudden, we're hitting a little bit of adversity. You're seeing players are a little disgruntled. The coaching staff seems to be not, on the same page with the media. It's going to be interesting. Can they hold this together knowing that you got 2 big games against the Eagles? The Vikings are basically the number 2 seed in the NFC right now. There's some tough sledding ahead for the Giants. How do they keep this together as a cohesive unit?
Yeah, the one thing I don't care about is kind of the way that they interact with the media, because the media they're coming out and talking again. They came out after the game and were like, what a disastrous tie. This is terrible for the New York Football Giants playoff picture. Like if you're not, again, you and I are talking about a little bit of a fan perspective. We take it the next step of trying to analyze what's going on in a game-to-game basis, et cetera. But we're not members of the media. If you're going to be a member, if you're going to write for news media outlets, it'd be really good if you actually had your information in order, right? Because all you have to do is look at the percentages and say, hey, while it's a tie, not a lot has changed here in this scenario. So I just want to put that to the side a little bit. The other thing, though, there's a couple of things that I will say. One is that when it comes to the players, as you mentioned, Rodarius Williams and Tay Crowder, listen, I get it, especially if you're Tay Crowder. Rodarius Williams a little bit different. He's been injured. He's tried to work his way back. He's had some opportunities, but there's a lot of things moving here, and mostly on the defense. I think they've gone kind of week to week, matchup by matchup, and said, "What's our best chance?" Now Zion Gilbert comes out of nowhere in the sense that like he wasn't really talked about being a contributor. He was an unsigned, undrafted free agent for the Giants, but he's an undrafted free agent for this regime, right? He's not a draft pick from a previous regime. And I said that all season long, going back to the beginning of the year, especially with a lot of these position battles. I think Tate Crowder has really performed well for what our expectations were for him. And also, you know that Joe Shane and this defense and Wink Martindale was always going to be looking for more consistency, a more dynamic playmaker, and people that are going to be able to contribute, again, specifically maybe in the biggest areas that the Giants need it, where they continue to struggle against the run. Right, that's not Tate Crowder's bread and butter. So you're trying to find ways to manufacture some success here. The interesting thing to me from a fan base perspective, and I wanted to get your take on this, it went from Mike Kafka might be a one-and-done coach for the Giants because everyone around the league is going to be clamoring to hire the great mind from Kansas City who stopped over in New York. Fans have like turned on him to the point where they're like, maybe he doesn't deserve to even be the offensive coordinator beyond this season. I find that really weird. And I want to get your take on it because I find it nuts that, and I find it crazy. And I said this last episode, I'm going to say it again. I really like the development of Daniel Jones this year. And also a certain segment of the fan base has decided there is no longer a need to ever critique what Daniel Jones does anymore because it's all about everything else he doesn't have. And now it extends to, and also Mike Kafka is a horrible offensive coordinator. I've said we've been disappointed the last few weeks in some of the play calling, but I put it all into the bag of personnel and game script and everything else that goes along with that. I don't look at it and go, oh, obviously he must be terrible. They should fire him. Obviously, Daniel Jones is a problem. They should have released him, week number 4. Saquon Barkley isn't running it. Like, you know what I mean? Like all of these things, they all work together.
So it's interesting you say that because one of the questions that Pat Leonard had asked Brian Daboll on Monday was, have you considered taking play calling responsibilities back from Mike Kafka to yourself? And like Daboll's like, absolutely not. Like next question, like what are we talking about? And I can understand it when you look at in its totality. If you're Brian Daboll, you're like, we're 7-4-1. We're winning football games with the talent level that we have out on this field. There's only been a handful of times this season where the Giants have been like outclassed completely, where you're like the talent on the field is just not good. They've been in almost every game. The Dallas game they lost by 8 points on the last second touchdown, but they've been competitive. They were competitive in this game as well. And look, if the Feliciano penalty goes a different way, if
Slayton holds on to that pass,
Darius Slayton ends up making that catch, if they call the pass interference on Richie James, if they call offsides in overtime when Richie James makes the catch over the middle, there's 7 different ways the Giants could have won that game. And all of a sudden we'd be saying Giants are in pole position to make the playoffs. Yeah. How great is everyone looking? What a call by Mike Kafka to throw the ball deep to Darius Slayton on that play. Right. And things change in an instant like that, Adam. And so for me, I think the whole point is cooler heads always prevail. You never see these knee-jerk reactions or instant reactions to one game or one thing
not
ever really teams.
Work out.
What's up?
Not from good teams. Like, good teams don't have,
You practice patience and you say, look, we are manufacturing offense. We are one of the top 12 teams in offensive efficiency. We're number 12 in red zone efficiency. Like, Justin Pennick, who does Talking Giants, he put out a thing that said, we haven't been this high in red zone efficiency since 2004. So it's like, yes, I know people are frustrated, but what were your expectations going into this? We were a fledgling and failing team that had 2 picks in the top 10 last year. Like now all of a sudden we're getting a little taste of success and people want to throw Mike Kafka under the bus. It's like, why don't we take a pause? If the Giants come up and they win 1 or 2 more games, we're in the playoffs. So, like, what are we talking about here?
Well, and again, and the reason why I brought up Daniel Jones is because if we're going to sit here and say, well, look at the weapons that Daniel Jones has in the wide receiving room, it's the same thing. And by the way, I want to find ways to manufacture success. I want to be critical of Daniel Jones to make the most out of what he has around him, the most around what his skill set is. But likewise, Mike Kafka, I wanted to maximize it. But if you're going to tell me that Daniel Jones doesn't have enough weapons to be successful, then how does Mike Kafka have enough weapons to make Daniel Jones successful? Like, these things go hand in hand. And again, the record early in the season clouds your judgment. Giants fans understandably finally get a good season where they're winning football games. You're competitive all the way into December. And now it's like, hey, that's the weight of expectations. And I think the funny thing I'll say about Brian Daboll and why I think he's being short is because the one area I don't think, so there's two things. One is that they've taken on a few more penalties on a week-to-week basis than we've seen in weeks prior. It was interesting. I went and looked at like some articles, local beat writers for the Washington Commanders. I think the reason why that game deserved to end in a tie is because they gave a laundry list of like plays that were missed by referees, opportunities that could have been, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where I think when both sides have enough to complain about, you go, yeah, the tie is exactly what we both deserved. But I don't know if Brian Daboll anticipated early on in the season doing his thing. He's obviously an engaging personality, gets the rapport with the media. You see some of these kind of outbursts. He's kind of becoming known for like one violent outburst on the sideline with a referee, typically with a referee. I'm talking about the player stuff, but it's like, hey, what is that call? I disagree with it, really losing his cool. And now you're seeing on the back end of it, hey, you've only won one game over this past several weeks. You have this tie. The expectations are that you're supposed to make the playoffs now. The beat writers are literally like, oh my God, dude, the chum in the water is getting bloodier and bloodier by the day. And it's like, all right, yep, one word answer. I'm trying to accomplish this thing, which in reality is still, to me, a secondary piece of what was trying to be accomplished this year. In a lot of ways, Brian Daboll would probably like to say, with Joe Schoen standing over his shoulder at a media session, we already did what we wanted to do here. Evaluate our quarterback, see if Saquon Barkley is going to be healthy, get a real sense of certain key players across this roster, and put ourselves in a position to build going forward. But guess what? You can't do that when you're 7-4-1 and you've got playoffs on the line.
You can't. But there's good news and there's bad news. And I think this is kind of the reflection of the season. The good news from the Commanders game is you look at the way that Evan Neal and Andrew Thomas played on the offensive line. Evan Neal, we're saying, rookie, learning curve, all this different stuff. He did not give up a single pressure in all of his snaps on the field.
And so that was good. Yeah.
It's something that we just forget about because it's a tie and you forget about this. But if we have our bookend tackles for the next decade, Giant fans should be very excited. Yeah. The issue was the defensive line of the Washington Commanders is really good in the middle. And Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen were absolutely destroying anything we had in the middle of the field. Our guard play was terrible. Our center play was not very good. And what's crazy about it is we talk about Saquon not being able to get going. We talk about the pressure that Daniel Jones faced up the middle. It's like, well, it's not that Daniel Jones can't make the throw or that Saquon Barkley can't make the run. If we're getting constant pressure on the interior of our offensive line, there's nothing that we can do. So it feels like a very similar, microcosm of the season for the Giants, where it's like we got some really good things that we see in what Thomas and Neal are putting there, but really the Glowinski signing has not been great. Feliciano was handpicked by Daboll and Schoen to come over at center. He has not been good, and they still haven't figured out the left guard situation. And so it's a little bit of good and a little bit of bad, and you hope for more good than bad, which would ultimately lead them to the playoffs.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And again, like no season is perfect. And again, so, and by the way, you mentioned good ones like, hey, big, not big swing and a miss, but marginal miss signing Glowinski has not been the consistent player you wanted him to be. Saying Feliciano is going to be the plug and play guy. We all could think a little bit differently about that. And maybe the Giants would have been better off spending money to get a key center that you could have plugged in there going forward, even beyond what Nick Gates was going to be or not be. And he's had an up and down. Shane Lemieux, now buried, not going to, not seeing the light of day. Guess what? 5th round pick might be a see you later already for him. But to your point, there are these things that are happening, these boxes that are getting checked. And it's actually funny. Think about it. Andrew Thomas, previous regime, left tackle, new regime, Evan Neal, your right tackle. There's your bookends. Defensively, you have Azeez Ojulari, previous regime. You have Kayvon Thibodeau, new regime. There's your bookends on the defensive side of the ball, right? So in terms of building up your cornerstones, the Giants are obviously doing that. It's just you're in this really funny space where, by the way, you know, the Daboll, everybody wants to make the playoffs. Everybody wants to put that
Of
feather
course.
in their cap, right? Daniel Jones, by the way, Daniel Jones is like in a quiet moments. He goes, yeah, guess what? Makes negotiations a lot better if I get to go to the playoffs, win or lose. If Daniel Jones goes to the playoffs and throws for 200 yards and runs for 70 and puts up a nice looking game against a quality opponent, that's going to help him. So it's all important for everybody involved. So that's just where I think it's just funny the way the ebbs and flows of the season go, which are true. Like, and I get it, and I fall victim to them at times as well. At the end of the day, though, Andy, the Giants are going to turn their attention to the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'll ask you the question that I brought up earlier in the episode. We'll get out of here on this. Do you think that the Giants are going to nurse their way through this Eagles game and maybe not circle it as, hey, let's go out and try to win this thing, as opposed to, we know we may be just one more week away from getting a few more players back on both sides of the ball and putting ourselves in the position to go win the most critical game on the schedule?
I honestly think that the Giants should manage this last 5 games of the season thinking we have to get 2 wins. Where do we think those 2 wins are going to be, and what do those 2 wins need to be? If you push all your chips in against the number 1 seed in the NFC and it doesn't go according to plan, it's a little bit of a challenge. I think there's a little bit more strategy, I think, towards the end of the season for where the Giants are, rather than like, I know they love to say we play one game at a time. We only focus on the next opponent. But I mean, we just saw what they did again against Dallas for Thanksgiving. They sat players thinking we want to get them back healthy for the Commanders game. It feels like, knowing that the Eagles are a really tough opponent and knowing how important that Commanders game is the following week, this is a tough one for me to think that the Giants are going to just push all their chips in and say we have to take a stand against Philadelphia. But again, what a nice surprise it would be if the Giants can show that fight at home, 6.5-point underdog, be able to come in and win against the number 1 seed. It would, I know it would give you a lot of confidence in the Giants if they were to be able to take a stand like that.
Oh, listen, I mean, I don't want to draw like the comparisons of like, Super Bowl playoff runs with Eli Manning when they faced the Patriots end of the season. But that idea of just like, if you want to be symbolically showing fight and showing that, hey, we can go toe to toe with the number 1 seed in the NFC, with obviously our division opponent. I think that, losing a game, but being within a touchdown and a legitimate touchdown, not a late garbage time score, that can mean a lot for a team in terms of building their confidence, because the other side of it is, this team, listen, yeah, they had a great start to the season and now they're stumbling, right? They're having a hard time. You're getting some players getting a little bit vocal about their playing time and their opportunities. So all of those things are obviously going to be factors here for the Giants as they move forward. I tell you, the risk reward of playing for a game you think you can win, it just happened. The Giants didn't risk too much against Dallas to circle this game against Washington. They came away with a tie. You circle a game against the Colts and say, that's the one where we plant our flag. Listen, NFL is filled with a lot of great players and a lot of prideful teams. If you think they're just going to roll over for you because you need that win, the Giants could have another thing coming. But we'll start to break down this matchup with the Philadelphia Eagles. Could be a unique schedule this week. Andy has a lot of things in the burner right now. So we'll see how we break this all down. We'll go ahead, of course, get our perspective going forward starting tomorrow. So you head over to YouTube, you follow, like, subscribe, rate, review, podcast feeds. You know the deal, friends. We appreciate the comments and we appreciate the continuing and growing support. Until next time, though, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.